Chapter 3. Watchers. It is a bit arrogant, but I am going to say it anyway. We can walk on water, bring the dead back from the grave, turn water into wine, heal the blind and lame. Why should we shy back from this proclamation? It is only weakness that stops us from grasping the light in our hands and making the world into what we wish. We certainly can do more than either Christ or Buddha historically, so I see no reason to ally with this obviously artificial religion. The various setbacks that have cropped up over the last 500 years are proof that what is really needed is to put reason back in charge. Kyle Vinson, Interstellar Rationalists newsletter, posted to the closed net, last known publication before his arrest.
Jermaine Wittenauer is a massive dick. This is, in my final estimation, a rather nuanced opinion. I believe that there are both positive and negative sides to being a dick, and I feel that Jermaine nicely embodies the entire spectrum of being an enormous prick. The long story short is that while Jermaine is in fact a grade A dick, he is, for better or worse, your grade A dick. All the endorsed comments on his persona are spattered with a mixture of contempt and admiration. Not that Jermaine cares one whit for his persona score. His piety and morality are both exceptional, and that is all that matters to him. From what rumors I have heard, and the few times that he has mentioned anything about his life or history, he is a kid from the wrong side of the tracks, who worked hard to get to where he is. Ruthless, proud, aggressive, and devoted beyond reason. There are many reasons to admire Jermaine, and just as many, if not more, to hate him. For my part, I have mostly come to truce with the various factors of his being. An uneasy truce, to be sure, but I reckon that calling it an armistice is taking the metaphor a step or two farther than it might be comfortable with. This being said, if there is one true threat to the fragile peace that we enjoy, it is the yelling issue, the shouting, the bellowing, the volume. I was fiddling around in the well-appointed bathroom of the deceased, doing my level best to get my head back in the game when my partner blew in. As I may have implied, there is always a heap helping of blow when it comes to Jermaine. He shouted all the way through the growing congregation of nosy neighbours and the like, who had sprung up in the byways and hallways that led to the victim's house, stopped at the door to shout at Constable Wing for no more reason than his awkward positioning. Vis-a-vis Jermaine's chosen path. He, of course, slammed the door behind himself. I found my unsteady emotions leapt easily into a black anger. If he gave me the slightest excuse, I was going to rip his tongue out. I leaned out of the bathroom and caught sight of a tall man with an unfamiliar face. He was broad across the shoulders and thick around the waist, muscled like an ogre and utterly devoid of hair. The misty morning sunlight from the panelling glinted off of his bare head, and I heard him grunt like a particularly pissed-off hog. I felt a fresh surge of anger, but had nowhere to direct it. He had arrived incognito, which was good for the case. But I was looking for a release, and chewing out my partner over his failures would have been perfect. "Nice face, Jer." I spat the words. "It's ugly as fuck, but I'd say it is a definite improvement." Jermaine's thick lips wrinkled with rancor, but his eyes were amused. He was the sort of cop that would have been a lot happier back in the days when a quick chat meant that you were about to have your kidneys redecorated in a cheerful purple, unless you started to cooperate. He hated all the hiding, sneaking and subterfuge that had become, over the years, an integral part of our job.
"Good morning, Suki,"
he said.
"You sound like you have had a wonderful night. Did your latest man-whore stiff you on the happy ending, or did some 12-year-old beat your ass in Shooty Nonsense 5?
It was like being punched in the gut. It made me feel small, and that made me feel even more enraged. It was my fault, really. I should have never trusted him. Germain smiled uncharitably at my obvious misery and tapped a finger on his cheek.
It's a Sveala shifter. Cost me a reasonable sum to get the rights, but it's variable configuration. I checked your posting before I left the barn and felt that slipping extra far below the radar would be best for all of us.
I forced a smile that I was afraid came off more a snarl than the sweet little grin I had aimed for, and flashed Captain Nim a short update. It was terse, even by the standards of the highly compressed medium of sendings, but it conveyed good news. We had a few more hours before anyone connected the cluster of police activity at the posh house of a minor celebrity to an active PsychoCIDE investigation. The sad thing about living in a society where there are recording devices everywhere and almost any demon worth its salt can run facial recognition software on thousands of hours of footage in a few seconds is that your movements are known to any who care to check. PsychoCIDE, and all the constabulary for that matter, have administrative override on a lot of the Ark monitoring systems and can drop ourselves from the surveillance grid if we so chose. Problem is that the Ark monitors comprise less than a tenth of the total grid coverage, and anyone with any degree of access, usually rented at a reasonable rate, can almost completely bypass the advantage that being a cop brings. We push back with basically the same tactics as the criminals we hunt: disguise, deception, and misdirection. Without these precautions, every newsfeed would know that Deacon Inspector Tatsuki McLauglin and Deacon Inspector Germain Wittenauer of the PsychoCIDE division entered the cordoned apartment of feed personality Damien Faulkner. The realization that there was a high-profile PsychoCIDE would come swiftly thereafter. Unlike Germain, I don't have the spare scratch to invest in a high-end piece of biotech like the Sveala. Metro doesn't offer vouchers for this kind of thing. They owned the license on a pretty substandard collection of pattern breakers, and haven't the budget or will to buy the rights to the sort of toys Germain was regularly sinking his personal funds into. Pattern breakers were only effective against Bush League surveillance. As a result, most cops, including me, rely on low-scale shroud systems. The blurry profile of the light-bending morphoactive system was almost synonymous with the inspectors on a case in the public imagination. The real irony is that despite his complete willingness to go the extra mile, Germain sometimes showed up bare-faced. There is a conflicted core to the man that resented the fact that he had to hide, but was determined to hide better than anyone else when forced. "You up to date?" I asked him the question for no other reason than to fill dead air. He was up to date. I was no longer even looking at him. I had returned to my canvas of the bathroom. Sweeping the various hygiene utensils with a sampler, trying to succeed where CS Ingrid failed. Maybe get lucky and grab a viable genprint, uncontaminated by the Sukshma nanobees.
Yeah,
He responded, no small amount of genuine aggravation coloring his tone.
up to date enough to know that you're not going to get shit from that bathroom. Up to date enough to know Ingrid has core samples from both of the victims, as well as copies of both their save points. Up to date enough to know that you are fucking around doing drone work.
I hissed under my breath, wishing for a moment that he was a little less up to date.
The techs have the emulator set up and are going to try to pull some fragments out of the depths. Get your rear in gear and your mind right. We have assholes to talk to.
It took all of 30 seconds for Germain to haul me, metaphorically, into the hallways and start the process of interviewing. You don't have to knock. If you stand in front of a door in any decent neighborhood for more than a few seconds, then the house's monitoring demon will flash the owner about your presence and ask them if they want you to be let in. This is not always the case once you leave the sheltering arms of the Ark. But here in the Void, this is true, in all but the worst sectors. Like the tent cities that form around the tether lines, or the infamous exclusion channel, shanties of the spiral market. Germain knocked anyway. He stood in front of the door, pounding away like it was a drum, shaking the frame with each thumping blow. No mean feat considering the materials involved. It was all part of the plan. Germain was in maximum dick mode, and he was going to make sure that everyone in this quality neighborhood understood that he was not going to abide by any of the ground rules that they were used to. As for me, I did my best to stand behind him and try to keep the feelings of worry down. I used to be far less cavalier about this sort of brash action. But not any more so when we are doing this little two-man con I am the good cop. I would interject about halfway through Germain's little rant, send him away, and then spend a few minutes talking shit about him to the subject. Usually this, combined with the aggressive sucker kit I have built into my sweat glands, opens them up to talking. Most people of status and quite a few of ill repute have pretty decent ASK countermeasures, but nothing in the world is perfect. And Germain has a near supernatural talent for throwing people off their game far enough that the combination of pheromones and my own sweet face is enough to induce a positive emotional violence. If the ploy fails, then we flag the witness as a person of interest, and the big guns come out. This was the fourth apartment on our list. So far we had harvested 3 bamboozled rich people, 3 sworn affidavits of permission, and 3 uploads of both home and personal monitor footage. As a tactic, it is pretty underhanded, but one of the major advantages it holds is results. We had all the video we need, and even better, we had yet to actually tell anyone what we were investigating. Crimes were solved by finding who caught it on tape. Someone always did. Monitoring was too ubiquitous to escape. It might not always be a complete video of the crime. It might only catch the perp coming out or going in. Sometimes it doesn't catch anything more than a square inch of a jacket. The thing is that once you have that little patch of fabric, you can then expand your search to a quarter mile around the crime scene and match it against every person that walked through that area. That gives you a pool of possibles who can then be cross-matched against whatever else you know to give you a prime suspect. Most of our job is bullying people into giving us access to their footage, then spending 1 billion hours reviewing it 6 ways to Sunday. This is one of the reasons why I find most of my job an unbearably boring affair. Still, it's not right to complain when you are one of the most respected cops in a 1,000,000-kilometer radius. I would say that I am also one of the best paid cops, but that is a statement that requires so many qualifications as to be rendered pointless. Germain launched into the 4th harangue of the afternoon, this time directed at a straw-haired Adonis wearing only a downy white towel. The Rue Henri native had come to answer the door in only his bath attire. I don't know whether this display was a purposeful attempt to entice me or because he truly did not care, but either way he was displaying a wonderfully sculpted physique, and I briefly found myself wondering who had done his pecs. The odds that he had worked them out naturally were slim to none, given a combination of factors, including the rich locale and general personality impression that I had gotten from the quick biography Nervash splashed into my variable use brain drive. Despite the eye candy, I found my mind wandering into strange places. A deep old sadness surged over me, and I cursed Arthur Nym. I was feeling unstable, and that was not a good place to be for me. When I had told the captain that I put my job first, I wasn't lying. I had made very few promises to myself that I ended up keeping, but so far I had managed to keep work ahead of play. I kept my lives separate. Didn't mix my meat and milk. Why? The thought came on with a sudden force, and I found myself wondering why I was here. I had been offered the choice. They had looked at my profile and told me straight up that I could go anywhere I wanted. Tatsuki, the prodigy. The girl with the magic numbers. The girl who went right to the top without passing through the years of vetting that would normally have been required. The girl who had authority over a partner who was nearly 20 years her senior. A partner who had been working the streets for nearly as long as she had been alive. I tried not to think about the inequities and shortcomings of the system. I consoled myself with the positive side. The sure knowledge that I am roughly 3.5 times more competent than Germain by agglomerate, and by individual metrics I beat him in almost every category. I was faster, stronger, smarter, tougher, more insightful, and more empathic. I deserved to be the senior partner despite the discrepancy of experience. Just because he had the years didn't make him better than me. Still, I couldn't shake the worry that I was not where I am supposed to be. That I was meant to be more, or that I hadn't become what I should be. 5 years of PsychoCIDE. 5 years of casework under my belt. 5 years with a near-perfect clearance record and a nearly spotless dossier that sings my praises at every turn. Sure, there was that addiction issue, but Psych gave me clearance, and the second generation are known for their quirks. Moreover, I was the golden child of the most influential chief superintendent in the constabulary. Fast-tracked to the top. Commissioner material, they whispered. The sort of girl that will be running the entire constabulary someday, if she can get her morality score up above the degenerate range. Yet all I could think of is how I was wasting away. How being hung from a gibbet by the snoops might not be an entirely negative thing. Nirvash's chiming voice whispered a warning in my ear, bringing me out of my reverie. Germain was winding down, and I missed it entirely. Sometimes I wondered what I would do without my genius to keep me grounded. I gave myself a small shake. It was time for me to take up my part in the dance. Enough, I said in a level voice. I put my hand on Germain's broad stomach and pushed him back. He overtops me by nearly 1.5 feet, but I easily swept him back a step. I saw a moment of confusion paint the pretty face of our interviewee. He wasn't expecting me to be in charge, and he certainly wasn't expecting me to be able to manhandle my partner. I smiled a broad smile, and I saw a faint flush creep up the side of our subject's neck. The pheromones that I was putting out were forcing his body into a state of excitement, and his mind was interpreting that as attraction. Normally, someone with a body as well designed as his wouldn't be falling prey to such a basic ploy. But Germain has a magic touch when it comes to throwing people off their game. Mestro Aguabiela, I spoke in warm tones. I know that all this is very disorienting. You have my sincere apologies. My partner is just a very zealous man, and we are investigating a heinous crime. I leaned forward, taking him into my confidence and letting my proximity jump start his heart. I am not trying to pry into your personal life, but you don't seem to be the sort that tolerates undesirables. And while I obviously can't share any details of the case, I can tell you that the help you can provide us might prove crucial in keeping this neighborhood flawless. I put extra emphasis on that clean bit, Let him draw his own conclusions about what exact manner of person we would be hunting down. I knew he was an elitist scumbag, but Nervash had done a little covert recon into the man's social networks and had gleaned a pretty complete profile of what particular flavor of elitist scumbag. Paolo Aguabella hated the sight of ugliness. It was a new trend, with roots in the very oldest traditions of the human race. I first noticed about 10 years back, but that was more a function of entering my teen years and realizing all the ugly shit that was swimming in the water with you. According to Germain and some others who had more historical perspective, this had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. With the advent of easy cosmetic surgery and other biotech appearance modifications, beauty was, if not cheap, at least affordable. Physical ugliness was a telltale sign of being one of the dispossessed, being poor and badly insured, being born in the exposure, or worse, being one of the millions of unlucky fucks who still lived with the body genetics had given them. Beauty has always and will always be measured by a mixture of genetic markers of health and fitness and relative standards. Whatever is the most difficult state of appearance to achieve is considered the most beautiful. Being desirable is always about how much better you are than the competition. Here, in the richest neighborhood of the richest ark, in the richest nation, in the entire breadth of Christendom, the competition were all specimens of impossible perfection. And yet they managed to rank themselves such that some of those perfect beings were considered by their peers to be ugly. True ugliness in the old sense of the word was, to people ensconced in this rare culture, like seeing a festering sore talk. Paolo was one of these people who would most likely vomit if one of the lowly touched him. It was an unchristian way to treat your fellow, but fantastic wealth excused a whole wealth of sins in the eyes of man, but not in the eyes of God. A thin sliver of venom flitted quickly across my thoughts, and I imagined for just a moment that Judgment Almighty would one day catch up to Paolo Aguabella for his uncharitable ways.
Of course, Deacon. Anything I can do to help.
The data load from his genius hit me, and my vision blurred slightly, as Nervash accepted the massive chunk of a high-resolution video and slingshotted it into Rommel's archives for analysis. He eagerly rushed to give us what we wanted, even as I imagined him weeping before the throne. Then it was my turn to feel uncharitable. There was a sickness in someone that could laugh at the damnation of another. I gave Paolo my immaculately false thanks, and Germain gave an obviously grudging acknowledgement. Together we turned as a single unit and then moved on to our next target. Nervash whispered a saddeningly large number in my ear, and steeled myself for an entire wasted day of bullying and boredom. The central illumination tube was dimming by the time the last name on our list was crossed off, and not with any sense of satisfaction. The writ on my sleeve was enough for many, but whenever a neighborhood was too wealthy or too poor, there were holdouts. The poor refused to cooperate often out of worry that their petty schemes would be exposed, or from a general distrust of authority and fear of imagined consequences. The wealthy refused to cooperate for almost the exact same reasons. They substituted fear for entitlement, but their worry about their peccadillos was no different. And while they were friends with our bosses, they trusted their friends not a whit. The heights were, as they said, paved with daggers. We had managed to get most of our affidavits signed and sworn, but there was a large block of holdouts. Now that all the video data was being examined by the meticulous eye of the CID evidentiary daimon, Our next move was to find out if there was any foul play on the storage side. The only way to destroy a soul was to have access to it through an incarnate vessel. That vessel could be a person's body, or it could be an emulator running a complete save point on a polymorphic neural network. As a result, you need to investigate both ends of the transaction bank and body, regardless of how obvious you think the crime is. Once the techs finished preparing a shallow dive, we would be able to get a soul imprint on the second victim's immortality. Once we had that, we could identify which bank held the phylactery of Mesomark Thala, and we would pay them a visit as well. We were going to have to wait significantly longer for a full dive. The damage done by soul destruction was rarely easily circumvented, and it would take the dive team a long time to piece together what could be salvaged. For now, Nevash let me know that the bank Mestro Faulkner was subscribed to was located on the Adam Hab in Section 7 all the way out on the Spa. They weren't high on my list of suspects, as they had been the ones that alerted us to the crime in the first place. But still, protocols were protocols. That particular section of the Adam habitat was only accessible via shuttlecraft, which meant a hassle and a quarter. But rules were rules. An early dinner was the same dinner as always. Pureed nutrition paste extruded into food like shapes. Mine tasted like sirloin steak and roasted asparagus with the faintest hint of acetone and ash staining the experience. I couldn't tell what Jermaine was tasting, but the tinge of sadness at the corner of his mouth spoke of a familiar almost. I paid a pretty penny for my taste subscription, but for some reason no one in the wide universe had quite been able to nail the exact combination of neural pathways that would produce a flawless imitation of real food. Nirvash was doing his best, projecting the illusion of taste onto the tasteless crap that I was eating. But by Gabriel's wings, it was no substitute for the real thing. Despite the bustle of 10,000 souls flowing this way and that, the quick eat was empty save for Germaine and I. We sat lonely at a faux wood trestle table and watched as the world passed around us. The Aldane Wild Starport was one of the most heavily trafficked in the entire arc, as it was the closest commercial access to not only the Marion Cross but the Ashfall Preserve and the Nexus itself. Despite this, few of the people passing through here would have reason to eat regurgitated protein paste. The poor who came through the gate at the Marian Cathedra wouldn't have the money to afford a shuttle, and the rich would have little reason to stop at a 3x9 hole in the wall slop house serviced by a drooping automaton, whose jerky motions and sluggish service spoke of an expired warranty and a fundamentally miserly owner. "We are fucked!" I spoke the words with a sigh.
No shit.
Came Germaine's vaguely amused response.
The interesting question is how we are fucked.
When was the last pro job that we worked? I forced another bite of the paste into my mouth and tried to ignore how fundamentally not like steak it felt as I made a show of masticating the already mushy substance.
3 years, the Whiteacre case.
His eyes flickered up and into the memory hole, and I could almost hear Brunhilde whispering in his ears.
Yeah, the Whiteacre case was the last professional hit we had, not counting good old Ecstasia.
I grimaced at the name. That's why we are fucked. If it is a gangland job, then we are never going to get evidence enough to prosecute, even if we know that it's either Lockstame, Williams, or Marcusa. Because let's face it, it's always one of them. If it is an out-of-town hitter, then chances are they are already gone, probably walking through security at the Marian Cathedra now. If it's one of the monastics... I paused and despondently moved a triangular protein thing from one side of my tray to the other. If it's one of the monastics, then the worst that is going to happen is that they will pay a fine for getting caught. To my surprise, Germain grinned a big shit-eating grin at my words.
Come now, Tats.
He spoke with an excessively jovial tone.
Where is your imagination? It could be a real monster that slipped the warding, and next thing you know, the Dragon Slayers are going to be setting fire to all of Ashfall, and the Inquisitoria is going to haul all of us in front of the Star Chamber to face judgment for our incompetence.
Despite myself, I chuckled. At least we get to see those Ashfall fucks burn, eh? Silence. My flippant comment fell on the table and sat there like a turd between us. Germain stared at me, his face inscrutable. The silence stretched, until finally it snapped with a small grunt of disgust that wrinkled his new brutish features.
Come on.
He said gruffly.
We have a shuttle to catch.